Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you to LifeScan and Johnson & Johnson to our Silicon Valley headquarters and home of our Johnson & Johnson Diabetes Institute, which provides healthcare professionals with education and training to improve the quality of life for people with diabetes. At LifeScan, our vision is to provide products and services that help create a world without limits for people with diabetes. As a leading maker of blood glucose monitoring systems, our LifeScan family of products are used by more than 10 million people across the world. In addition to our vision, we're also guided by our credo, which outlines our responsibilities not only to those who rely on our products, but also to our employees, stakeholders, and to the community at large. Specifically, our credo states, we must maintain in good order the property we are privileged to use, protecting the environment and natural resources. Our credo was written in 1943, well before it was fashionable to be green. I'm privileged to work for such a progressive company that even before the end of World War II, we recognized the importance of being a steward of the environment and protecting resources for generations to come. Today, we carry on this commitment to a more sustainable future through the reduction of water and energy use. Over the last 10 years, LifeScan has successfully completed water conservation projects that have resulted in more than a 90% reduction in potable water use, from 27.5 million gallons in 2002 to 1.2 million gallons in 2012. In addition to water conservation, LifeScan has also reduced our greenhouse gas emissions over the last decade from more than 9,000 metric tons annually to less than 2,900 metric tons annually. We are honored to be the recipient of the 2013 Silicon Valley Water Conservation Award in the business category. And we appreciate the partnership with many agencies, including Pacific Gas and Electric and Sustainable Silicon Valley, in support of our various initiatives. I hope our efforts and those of fellow past winners, including Applied Materials, Cisco, Hitachi, and Adobe Systems, will inspire others to increase their conservation efforts, which are not only good for the environment, but are good for business as well. Water, like talent and innovation, is essential to a thriving business community here in the Bay Area. And while conservation is important, our future water needs cannot be met by conservation alone. An infrastructure that provides a reliable source of water for the future is essential. This is why we are pleased to host the release of the final chapters of the Bay Area Conservation Plan in an effort to restore the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta ecosystem and provide a reliable source of water for 2/3 of California's population. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Bo Goldie. Bo started his career at the Santa Clara Valley Water District more than 29 years ago as a civil engineer and has been its chief executive officer since 2009. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're very happy to welcome our state and federal contractors to Silicon Valley to discuss the release of the remaining chapters of the Bdcp. I also wanted to especially thank LifeScan for hosting this event this afternoon. And I also wanted to congratulate them on the 2013 Silicon Valley Water Conservation Award. That's a great accomplishment, a great achievement, and that's a great job. So congratulations with that. Speaking of water conservation, that is one of our key strategies in Silicon Valley for meeting the future water demands. In fact, Silicon Valley, we currently save 54,000 acre-feet of water this year alone through water conservation measures. And our long-term goal is to save almost 100,000 acre-feet by the year 2030. It's not going to be easy, but it's an essential component of our plan to meet the demands, supply demands of Silicon Valley through 2035. Another essential component is on our water supply portfolio is the recycled water program. It's a drought-proof, locally controlled water source. Currently, 5% of the water supply for Silicon Valley is recycled water. Our goal is to double that by the year 2025. We're currently taking major steps. We have a $65 million advanced water purification center coming online later on this summer. It will be producing 8 to 10 MGD at 1 million gallons a day, and we're looking forward to that being operational in August. Yet with these efforts and these strategies, we're still pursuing the remaining future largely dependent on imported water supplies. Today, 55% of the water supply for Silicon Valley comes from the Sierras. 40% of that flows through the Delta itself. Santa Clara County depends on this from both the state and federal water contract projects. It's critical that these imported water supplies be maintained, not only to meet the annual drinking water, but also to sustain the county's groundwater basin, which prevents the reoccurrence of subsidence and saltwater intrusion. We must manage also the water supply for our local habitat and wildlife and fisheries resources that we have. So the Santa Clara Valley Water District provides supplies to 1.8 million people and companies like Apple, Computer, Google, eBay, Cisco, Applied Materials, and a host of other companies that help drive the economic engine of the state. We are regional innovators known for the creativity and the ability to make things happen. That ability is to think outside the box, to make new paths and foster new approaches to problem solving. It's sorely needed to solve the water problems of the state, and the Bdcp is a big step forward. This plan that moves away from the limited species-by-species approach takes a holistic approach towards innovating the overall health of the ecosystem through habitat restoration, reducing multiple stressors. This is combined with the conveyance improvements and an operational constraint that improve the reliability of the water supplies so that this important resource is provided to this region. We have supported the development of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, a plan that aims to achieve co-equal goals of restoring and protecting both water supplies and habitat restoration. With that, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. It's my honor to introduce California Secretary of Natural Resources and outstanding former Assembly member who represented part of Silicon Valley, Mr. John Laird. Thank you.
Thank you, Bo. And I, too, want to salute Johnson & Johnson on their Water Conservation Award. I know that in a prior incarnation, I received an individual award in, I believe, the same, if not similar, process. And it's very good, those efforts, because they model for other people what the right thing is to do. We've worked hard the last 2 years to be transparent in water planning and put all information on the table for everyone at the same time. Today, with the release of the final chapters of the Bdcp, the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, the entire draft of the Bdcp and EIR are out on the street before the public process formally begins, and the comment period formally begins later this year. Puts all the information out in front of everyone to help make decisions. The Bdcp is but one effort among many that are addressing California's overall water needs. Many actions that will help solve California's water problems, both in and beyond the Delta, are actually outside the scope and reach of the Bdcp. Key integrated watershed management elements that help support the achievement of the co-equal goals of the Bdcp, the co-equal goals that were given to us by the legislature in 2009, but are not within the Bdcp's specific scope, include increased water use efficiency and conservation, increased water supply through storage, desal, water recycling, and groundwater management, improved operational efficiency through other water conveyance projects, increased Central Valley Project and State Water Project operational efficiencies, and voluntary water transfers and exchanges. As important as investments in additional water strategies, such as the ones that I just listed, are, they cannot entirely replace Delta supplies. The Delta is the source of 30 to 75% of the water used in some big, economically robust regions of our state, including the Silicon Valley. We just heard about that from Bo Goldie of the Santa Clara Water District, because Santa Clara Water depends basically 50% on the Delta in normal times and much higher. It could be 80 or 90% in severely dry times, and I think it is not well understood. People think that state water is about some farmers in the valley and just Southern California. The Silicon Valley relies overwhelmingly on Delta water, and the economy of the Silicon Valley is tied to whatever the direction is of the state water project. Conservation is important, but shoring up the reliability of Delta supplies and continued investment in smart water management will enable California to meet the future demands. And with conservation also comes the obligation that when you conserve, what is still there in the water portfolio must be reliable. And that is what this project is about. And lastly, I just want to emphasize that California's current water supply system is clearly vulnerable to many threats, and the cost of its failure would be enormous. We have seen what happened with Superstorm Sandy on the East Coast, where the cost for cleaning up and dealing with infrastructure after the fact was 3 or 4 times what it would have been if the investment had been made prior to the incident. That concept is exactly in play here. And so, as public officials, we are duty-bound to address these threats. This conservation plan provides the most comprehensive, well-conceived approach to ensuring a reliable water supply to 25 million people and restoring the Delta ecosystem. With that, a key part of this whole process has been our partnership with the federal government, and we are working closely with our federal partners and their agencies. And I know on the phone is Letty Beelan from the Department of the Interior, and she is going to be the next speaker.
Thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Well, I will pick up on what John was just saying and say that the Obama administration is arm in arm with you all. We very much agree with the state about the urgency of the problems relating to the state water supply as it goes through the Delta and the problems that the Bay Delta ecosystem is facing. And also, there's a great urgency on proceeding with a solution. We strongly believe that inaction is the worst option. And we also agree with the state that about the promise that Bdcp holds to address these problems. We've been particularly pleased with the close partnership we've had with the state and how much progress we've been making together, especially in the months since the late July announcement that Governor Brown and Secretary Salazar made about the proposed project. Certainly, the issuance today of the last chapters, the draft of the last chapters of the plan is a major milestone. And we'll take a moment to recognize that. But I will say on the federal side, and I'm sure it's true on the state side as well, we are completely focused on the huge amount of work on the Bay Delta Conservation Plan and the EIR-EIS that remains to be done between now and October, when we expect to get the public review draft of the EIR-EIS out along with the plan. So our folks are working, and I'm with the Interior Department. The Bureau of Reclamation and the Fish and Wildlife Service are part of the Interior Department. We also work all of us are working very closely with NOAA Fisheries out of the Commerce Department, and I think I'm speaking on all those agencies' behalf today. So we are very focused on the work that we will be doing with the state in close collaboration with them on both the BDCP, the plan itself, and the EIR, EIS over the next few months leading up to that October release of those documents. So we, let's see, I guess I want to emphasize also the fact that the cornerstone of the plan has to be and will be good, independently verified science. We can't settle for anything less. That's the Obama administration has been about good science, and this undertaking is perhaps one of the most important actuations of that commitment. So that science is going to provide the foundation for the plan submitted in support of the permit application and for the collaborative science program that will also be a key element of the plan itself into the future. So with the October release of the public draft EIR, EIS, the public will then have lots of time and opportunity to review and comment on these documents. I guess I want to emphasize that I've been working in the NEPA and CEQA area for over 30 years, and I have never seen anything close to as much sort of transparency and public availability of documents before they are even to the public review stage. So it may seem like a lot of material, but it is a lot of you're seeing the work as it's in process, and I think that's appropriate and a good thing for everyone. So with that, I guess I'd like to introduce Mark Cowen, the Director of the Department of Water Resources. Thank you.
Thank you much, Letty. Release of these final chapters is a major milestone for us in this 7-year planning effort, and it's been a heavy lift on the part of many people, so I'd like to just take a moment to thank the dozens of people at my agency, the Department of Water Resources, as well as the folks that have worked on this at our partner state and federal agencies, and of course our consultant team and the many stakeholders and members of the public that have helped shape this plan. In developing the plan, we've analyzed more than a dozen alternatives, all aimed at accomplishing those co-equal goals that you've already heard about, restoring the Delta ecosystem and improving our water supply reliability. Those goals are inextricably linked, and recognition of that linkage is an underpinning principle of BDCP, and I think that's something to recognize. This is the first time we've taken on a major planning approach in California that has put these two co-equal goals to test and developed a plan around a recognition of the linkage between those two goals. In carrying out that planning, we've looked at any number of different variations on types of conveyance, including through Delta conveyance using existing channels, new canals, new tunnels, different alignments of those facilities, different operating rules for those facilities, and of course, different combinations of types of habitat restoration and goals for acreage of habitat restoration. In selecting a preferred approach, we have to consider how to best manage risk in light of considerable future uncertainty, and that's another new fact in California water planning. How do we manage risk? How do we consider an uncertain future for California? We think our proposed plan, including the new Delta conveyance facility with a maximum capacity of 9,000 CFS and 145,000 acres of restored or protected habitat, strikes that best balance. And in the draft chapters that we're releasing today, you can see for yourself how well experts think that the various alternatives would achieve those goals compared to a variety of other alternatives. In the coming months, we will continue to study alternatives, including those that call for a smaller intake. But please remember that the documents that we're sharing today, as well as the ones that we've released in the previous weeks, are all very preliminary. We're essentially showing our work in progress. We're going to work to refine our proposals in the coming months, and we'll revise and fine-tune to improve the performance of the project, as well as to reduce the impacts of the project on Delta communities. and again, working towards a public official release of this material in October of this year. The new chapters today, including the finance chapter, shows an overall cost of $24.5 billion for this conservation plan in undiscounted 2012 dollars. Of that, the capital cost of the new conveyance facilities is about $14.5 billion. The remaining costs are the capital costs of new habitat and the other actions included in the plan, as well as the operation and maintenance costs over the life of the project. And I want to caution you, there are a lot of different ways of describing the costs in this plan. This particular look at the costs describes undiscounted 2012 dollars. That just simply means the dollars that we expend over time without consideration of a discount rate or interest. For other purposes in the plan, we use discount rates and apply different economic principles to comparing costs. So when you see different numbers, consider what the purpose is and ask an expert to explain to you what the appropriate comparison is. Anyway, these costs would be spread over 50 years. With that cost, we would retrofit the hub of the water delivery system for 25 million people in California, and we'd help 57 different species of plants and animals recover in the Delta. It bears mentioning that about 70% of these costs would be paid by the water agencies that actually receive water from the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. So the obvious question today is this plan affordable? And the analysis done by Dr. Sending, who will speak in a moment, shows about a $5 billion net benefit to water agencies when you add together the benefits of water quality, water supply reliability, and reduced seismic risk to the water delivery system. And Dr. Sending will help explain how we come about that estimate of benefits. But when you consider the current trends in the Delta, I think the real question is, can we afford not to implement the Bay Delta Conservation Plan? Just a few words on context of BDCP. Secretary Laird touched on this, but I think it's important that we recognize that we're not promoting the Bay Delta Conservation Plan as the answer to all of California's water issues. Whether we implement this conservation plan or not, we're going to need more water use efficiency, stormwater capture, recycling, and other smart water management approaches to help meet future demand. We understand this is essential for California, and California is responding. We've invested billions of dollars to implement these smart practices across the state, and we're going to continue to invest. But that integrated approach cannot compensate entirely for erratic Delta supplies. If all our work towards stretching supplies at the regional and local levels goes towards compensating for continuously declining Delta supplies, we as a state will be poorly positioned to satisfy a growing population and to deal with the risks of climate change as they approach in the next decades. We've got an obligation to plan for future generations, and that's why we put 7 years of hard work into developing this Bay Delta Conservation Plan. And we're going to keep refining the plan based upon public input. So again, before I close, I want to thank you all for being here and helping get the word out to Californians about the details of our plan, the importance of these issues. And before we move to our next speaker, I'd like to introduce Dr. David Zippin. I get my Davids confused sometimes. Vice President at ICF International. His team has worked with DWR to develop this plan over the past few years. So he will be here to help us answer your questions. And now let me introduce Dr. David Sending. He's been the one that's been analyzing the economic costs and benefits of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan for some time. He contributed to Chapter 9 that was released today in its appendices. Dr. Sending is a Thomas J. Graff Professor at the UC Berkeley College of Natural Resources. He's also co-chair of the Berkeley Water Center. Dr. Sending.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Well, let me begin by giving you a little bit of a walkthrough about the material that's been released today. And I want to focus primarily on chapters 8 and 9. In chapter 9, there are also 2 appendices that you should pay attention to. Chapter 8 lays out the projected costs of the BDCP, construction costs, operation costs, habitat restoration costs, the whole package. And also gives information on the financing plan as it's been developed to date. Chapter 9 is an analysis of what are called take alternatives. So alternative ways that BDCP could have been put together, different combinations of conveyance facilities, habitat restoration, and operating rules. So it's really, if you think about it, it's a way of explaining why the plan looks the way it does. Why was, for example, the 9,000 CFS facility the one that was chosen to be the proposed action? So it's essentially a chance to show our work. Now, with respect to the economic analysis, which has been a big part of the public discourse around BDCP, let me explain what has been released and what is still to come. In Chapter 9, we take a look at the economic benefits and costs of the BDCP to the state and federal water contractors that are going to pay for over 2/3 of the costs of the BDCP. So it's a very detailed cost-benefit assessment of the BDCP and a wide variety of alternatives from the perspective of the agencies that will bear the majority of the costs. Now, those are not all of the economic impacts that will result from the BDCP. There are economic impacts to groups that are not participating directly in the plan, say Delta Agriculture. There are economic implications of the BDCP that are felt in California's macroeconomy, say as a result of reduced water shortages. So later in the summer, we think in the July time period, we'll have a statewide economic impact study of the BDCP to be released. And there again, we're looking at the economic impacts of the plan, not just on the agencies that are responsible for the majority of the costs, but to the public at large. So look for that again sometime over the summer. Now, with respect to the analysis that's in Chapter 9, there are 3 categories of economic benefits that we considered from the perspective of the state and federal contractors. Increased water supply reliability, increased water quality as a result of heavier reliance on North Delta diversions, and then third, reduced seismic risks from having new conveyance facilities constructed in the Delta. And in all cases, for BDCP and all of the take alternatives, we're comparing implementation of that alternative versus doing nothing. So the economics of doing nothing is embedded in every part of the analysis that we looked at. Now, again, as Mark was saying, the Chapter 9 analysis, and this is a regulatory requirement, has to look at the BDCP as well as a whole range of alternative configurations. So we look at larger and smaller conveyance, at more and less habitat restoration. We look at tighter operating criteria. And then under each alternative, look at what would be the costs of doing that, and then what would be the economic benefits of doing that to the water agencies that are paying the majority of the BDCP costs. And if it turns out under a take alternative that the benefits are less than the cost, then that alternative is not economically feasible, and it's not something that could be pursued. So with respect to the conclusions, what the analysis shows in the first instance is that BDCP is expensive and it's worth the investment by state and federal contractors. This combination of water supply, water quality, and reduced seismic risks produces benefits that are 35 to 40% in excess of the costs. So that's a reasonable rate of return on a water investment. Second, as a number of speakers have said, BDCP is only a part of an overall water management strategy for the state and federal contractors that will bear these BDCP costs. Even with BDCP, to deal with projected growth, climate change, natural variations in precipitation from year to year, there's still a need for very large investments in conservation, recycling, potentially desalination, stormwater capture, really all of the above. So the issue is it's not proper to portray this as a question of do you do BDCP or alternatives. It's BDCP and alternatives, and our economic analysis reflects that. So thank you. I think that's the end of the remarks, and we're ready to take questions.
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. And our first question comes from the line of Bettina Boxall with the Los Angeles Times. Please go ahead.
This is for David. Yesterday, opponents of the project were very much questioning the economic benefits analysis, and Jeff Michaels was saying that the cost greatly outstrips the benefits. So how can you explain the discrepancy, and to the average person who's going to wind up, picking up part of the tab for this, how can you rationalize these studies that are so conflicting? I mean, is it just a matter of you cook up the numbers the way you want to cook up the numbers and you come up with what you want to?
Well, no, we're not doing that. And I should say I think Jeff would benefit from reading the study before we have too much more public conversation about this issue. He made those remarks before he'd had a chance to take a look at chapters 8 and 9 and the appendices. So I think it's probably more profitable to wait until he's had a chance to do that.
Well, he has done his own analysis, and he has come up with very different results. So how can you reconcile these contrasting results?
Well, with all due respect, I don't think he has done his own analysis. And again, I am not prepared right now to get into a debate with someone who's not here in the room. But I think it would benefit you to go back and look at whatever he's actually put out and see the basis for the remarks that he made, because I don't frankly think they're justified.
Thank you.
Excuse me, operator. Before we go to the next question, I'd like to just briefly acknowledge some stakeholders we have in the room with us today. Dave Puglia, Senior Vice President of the Western Growers Association. Casey Beyer, Senior Advisor of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Lauren Arms, San Francisco Regional Facilities Lead with Johnson & Johnson. Andrew Fields, Director of the Bay Area Government Affairs and Water Policy for the California Alliance for Jobs. Chris Jackson with NAACP, State Executive Committee Member. And Tony Estremera, with Santa Clara Valley Water District Board Vice Chair and Latino Water Coalition Northern Co-Chair, as well as Mario Santoyo with the Latino Water Coalition. Thank you.
Our next question comes from the line of Wyatt Buchanan with the San Francisco Chronicle. Please go ahead.
Hi. First, a technical question, and I want to expand on that. How much of the $24.5 billion is Delta ecosystem restoration funding? Focused a lot on the project and the construction, but I'm wondering about the ecosystem part of this.
This is Mark Cowen. That material, of course, is covered in great detail with the chapters released today, as well as the flyers we have that summarize the information. Again, speaking in terms of undiscounted 2012 dollars, the total cost of the project over 50 years is $24.5 billion. The capital cost associated with the Delta Conveyance Facility is $14.5 billion. I believe the capital cost associated with the restoration and the other actions is about $4 billion. So then the rest would be associated with the operation and maintenance, the monitoring, the science associated with implementing the plan over the 50 years.
Okay, so if we're talking about $4 billion on the Delta restoration, from your numbers on this bond funding, you're looking at about $3 billion in bond money for that, and I'm wondering what happens and how you meet the co-equal goals if that bond money isn't there, because obviously the 2014 one, the numbers could change. It's been moved a couple times, and then there's another $1.9 billion from a yet to exist bond. So how do you talk about co-equal goals when that money is so in flux?
Well, I guess I'd answer that in a couple of ways. First of all, the permit that we're seeking will require us to fund all of the activities we commit to. So that means if a water bond doesn't pass in 2014, we'll have to look for other sources of funding over the course of the 50 years that we're going to implement the program. So we show in the information released today potential sources of funding to fulfill the requirements of a habitat conservation plan to lay out what those potential sources are. This isn't a finance plan, so we'll have to work in more detail over plan implementation to come up with all of the cost shares, all of the funding necessary to implement the plan. And again, there's some flexibility here between state and federal funding sources. We're not trying to depict exactly where the money is going to come from, only that there is a history of these kind of investments in California, and we're confident that California voters will approve these types of investments once they understand the benefits.
Thank you.
And our next question comes from the line of Steven Scazzillo with the Los Angeles News Group. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. My question goes to, I don't know, Mark or whoever. There's been a lot of talk, I think you said that, Mark, regarding the cost and how much this will cost, et cetera, et cetera. Some people are trying to, parcel that out, saying how much it will cost per homeowner in Los Angeles. Do you have any, does Chapters 8 and 9, or do you have any, do you take a stab at that?
I'm going to ask Dr. Sundin if he can respond.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. So taking the costs that are detailed in Chapter 9 and making sort of reasonable assumptions about how those might be financed. So understand this is all kind of a working hypothesis. If you break it down from the perspective of a typical urban household, the incremental cost of Bdcp is in the range of a few dollars per month. So something for the Southern California area where I've looked in some detail, it's something in the $5 per month range, just to put it down into really, really simple terms.
That's over 50 years or 40 years? I wasn't clear on that.
Yeah, that would be over a 40-year period, and that is, I believe...
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not clear on what you're saying. Can you just tell me if it's 40 or 50? Can you just state that?
Yeah, 40.
40?
40.
40?
40.
Okay, I appreciate that. We were having trouble hearing you, that's why.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah, and the reason for the 40-year period is that would be a typical way to finance a project like this. It would have a 40-year payback period.
Thank you. And our next question comes from the line of Alex Breitler with the Stockton Record. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I have a question about the overall cost of $24.5 billion. The last draft of Chapter 8 that I think came out in February 2012 estimated 23.6, I believe, and of course that was based on the larger 15,000 CFS project. So I guess I'm wondering why the cost has apparently increased, given the fact that at least the tunnels aspect of the project has been reduced in scope.
I think I can address that. This is David Zippin with ICF International. Several costs did go down, you're correct. We saved money by reducing the number of intakes, but in order to make the project a gravity-fed system, the tunnels had to get larger and also a little bit longer, so that increased costs. The cost estimates back in February 2012 are also somewhat incomplete. We had some components of the program administration, for example, that were missing at the time or incomplete. So since then, we've estimated those costs and included them. So it was both some savings from the new facility as well as some added costs. And the other important change was that we updated costs to 2012 dollars. The previous estimates, I believe, were in 2010 dollars. So inflation added costs as well.
Okay, thank you.
This is Mark Henn. I would just note that we're going to continue to refine those cost estimates, so don't etch those in stone at this point. We think they're pretty accurate and certainly right for this type of investigation at this stage in the planning process, but we will continue to work those numbers. Could I take questions from the audience? Yes. Do we have a microphone?
Hi. You talked a lot about doing an accelerated timeline for the habitat restoration, like I think it's 30,000 acres before any water starts flowing. Can you do that with just the 2014 water bond? Would a second state water bond need to pass to get that done, or are you counting on federal sources for that?
Well, I would ask Dr. Zippen if he has any particular insight on this to respond. I would say that part of that commitment will be achieved by implementing requirements that the state and federal projects already have to implement habitat restoration. So some state and federal funding from state and federal water contractors could be applied to some of that initial habitat restoration. Certainly, a bond passed in 2014 would be a big step and perhaps fulfill our need for the 30,000 acres, but I'll ask Dr. Zippen to add.
Yeah, Mark is correct. Some of the restoration targets that we have, both up until year 10, when we expect the water facility to be operational, as well as year 15, could be met from existing expected funding from the state and federal water contractors, as well as continued appropriations, federal appropriations for the Bay Delta region. We've had a long history of appropriations through the Bureau of Reclamation and other federal agencies that we expect to continue and potentially even grow. And those we expect to be available almost immediately to help support restoration. A good example of that is the recent commitment by Reclamation to start to do the planning work for restoration of the Yola bypass. And that's now a separate process, but certainly connected and tied in closely with Bdcp. So while the bonds certainly are important, and we do count on them for the ultimate funding needs of the program over 50 years, we have other sources that we can rely upon in the near term.
Other questions in the room? Operator, are there other questions on the line?
Yes, we have an additional question from Deborah Kahn with Greenwire. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thanks. So I was just wondering, when are you going to make a decision on actual operations? Because it seems pretty crucial for the water contractors who are going to pay for it to know there's a big difference between 4.7 million acre feet and 5.5 or 5.6. So I was just wondering when you're planning on refining that.
Well, let me take a shot at this. Mark Cowen again. Our plan, as described right now, includes a program of scientific research to evaluate just what the particular outflow needs are to meet our restoration goals. So, first of all, I need to be clear that whatever the outflow requirements end up being, they will be driven by the biological goals and objectives and consistent with the co-equal goals for the Delta. At this point in time, we see that there is benefit from Bdcp regardless of what those outflow requirements end up being. And this is also laid out in the Chapter 9 material that you've received today. There is an independent benefit for correcting the reverse flow problem in the Delta. And this gets back to the experience of this year, in fact, when in late December, January, February, we had to cut way back on pumping for both the state and federal projects in order to avoid reverse flows to protect Delta smelt and some salmon species. Those actions cost the projects over 700,000 acre feet of water this year that could be in storage and available for use this summer. Those actions...
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, well, my point is that regardless of what Delta outflow requirements end up being, that type of protection will be made will be available to us with this Delta conveyance facility when it's not available to us now. So if you look at the Chapter 9 material, we evaluate the potential benefits of this project with both a high outflow scenario and a low outflow scenario. And you'll see that in either case, the benefits to the state and federal water contractors remain at about $5 billion. So while there's less water supply delivery, that water supply becomes much more valuable to them. And maybe I'd ask Dr. Sending if he wants to add anything to that.
Sure. The experience that Mark was referring to earlier on in the year is a good case study of what the Bdcp is about. And let me just lay out, as you read through the document, let me just linger a little bit on what it means not to do Bdcp, because this is, of course, the source of the benefits of doing Bdcp. It's not possible to maintain anything like the current land base in agriculture, which is a very important part of the state's economy, without some kind of regulatory protections that you get from a habitat conservation plan like Bdcp. So the incremental water supply that results from doing the plan is incredibly important for the economy, and that's what I think gets reflected in the analysis.
Okay, so is there a timeline for when you would actually pick one? Because I feel like the range is big enough that water contractors are not sure whether they're on board.
Well, again, the plan describes a program of scientific research that would be carried out during the construction period, and the fish agencies that are responsible for regulation would make that determination prior to operating the facilities. So to directly answer your question, the water agencies are going to have to make their determination to invest in this prior to an ultimate decision on precisely what flow requirements will be in place.
So that you're saying they need to decide before the outflow decisions are made?
That's correct.
And if I could just, this is Dave Sunning again, if I could just elaborate a little bit. The results that are in Chapter 9 do look at bookends for these flow criteria. So it looks at a range of possible operations of the facilities after implementation of Bdcp. And then it looks at a similar set of bookends under the existing conveyance. So this, the possibility of different operating criteria is factored into the analysis. And I would say that under either the high or low outflow criteria, the two ends of the range, the project still has net benefits, so benefits in excess of cost to the state and federal contractors that will pay for over 2/3 of the cost.
Any more questions?
And our next question comes from the line of Steve Harmon with Bay Area News Group. Please go ahead.
Yes, hi. I'm late to this, so just wondering if you can tell me whether a bond was always to be a part of the funding, and can you assure the public that the bonds won't increase in size? Hello?
I'm going to ask Secretary Laird to respond to particularly the last part of your question.
Well, could you do the first one, though? The first part of the question?
Well, yes, as I spoke to earlier, passage of the 2014 bond as written today would be a big benefit to moving the Bay Delta Conservation Plan forward. But we have 50 years to implement this plan, and the success or implementability of the plan is not tied to passage of that particular bond.
No, I know. What my question was, has a bond always been a part of the funding? Was it always part of the plan funding for this?
Well, maybe just for clarification, that the funding that we would be looking for from a GO bond or other state and federal public sources would be for the restoration component of the plan, the habitat restoration component of the plan, not for the water conveyance facilities.
Right. And so is that part of the initial thinking?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I just knew. And then I guess Secretary Laird, can you assure the public that the bonds won't increase?
Well, being a former legislator, I cannot assure the public about anything the legislature is going to do. But basically, the Habitat Protection Plan would be funded over 50 years. And so it is standalone from a bond. If the bond doesn't happen, there will be ways to figure out funding to do the habitat side of things. And so I don't think there's any disposition at this point to raise the bond for that purpose.
Also, politically speaking, Secretary Laird, how difficult do you think will it be to get a bond through the changes of this 2014 bond that includes supporting this tunnel plan?
Well, maybe let me restate something Mark just said really clearly. There is a specific provision in the bond that says not a dime from the bond will go to a conveyance facility. So that is just really clear. There is nothing in the bond that would lead to the tunnels or conveyance. And the habitat protection restoration really is a separate thing that stands on its own. That would be a commitment under a permit. And if the money didn't come from a bond, other sources would be assessed.
Okay, and then, but about the political piece of that, do you think there's a stomach for even to do anything that supports the tunnel plan?
Well, the question presumes that something that's not in the bond is in the bond. That is not a presumption I would agree with.
No, but this is in support of the entire plan.
It is in support of the habitat restoration. It is not in support of the tunnels. And the tunnels would be paid for by the beneficiaries of the tunnels. And if the habitat protection plan did not have money that come from the bond, there would be other ways to figure out over the 50-year life of it of how to fund it. So it is not, as the question supposes. And I think it is a little bit above my pay grade to talk about just the bond in its entirety and how people will assess it politically. I think that's something that the major stakeholders will look at over the next year to decide what to do.
Okay, thank you.
Did we have another question in the room?
Hi, Lauren Summer with KQED. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more about the seismic benefits kind of in this analysis, particularly, I mean, if it doesn't include levee improvement, where is that really coming from?
Well, let me start, and then I'll turn over the economic part to my economic expert here. The basic seismic benefit would come from relocating the 9,000 CFS intakes for the state and federal projects to the Sacramento River, where they're out of the influence of the potential harm from levee failures. So out of the tidal zone, up above sea level on the Sacramento River. So in the event of a seismic event or a flood event that resulted in catastrophic levee failure and flooding of one or more delta islands that inhibited our ability to use the existing South Delta pumps, then we could still use the 9,000 CF capacity on the Sacramento River to provide for at least a marginal level of water supply to help with the basic economic needs of the state.
Sure. Under normal, this is Dave Sunning again. Under normal operating conditions, the Bdcp envisions that water would still be taken out of the South Delta, but more would be taken out of the North Delta. So then after an earthquake, the South Delta facilities might not be operational, but the North Delta facilities would be. So the construction of the isolated conveyance portion of Bdcp allows for a quicker, essentially instantaneous rehabilitation of not all, but a large majority of water supplies following a large earthquake that took out a number of islands in the Delta. So that has benefit in the sense that there are avoided shortages that would be enjoyed by urban and agricultural contractors. And the benefit of that, by the way, it is a complex subject because the benefits depend on factors like whether an earthquake occurs in a wet year or a dry year. If an earthquake occurs in a dry year when storage all over the state is depleted, then the effects could be catastrophic.
Could you break down the contractor costs between urban and agriculture, and also is there a range of how much this would add to an acre foot of agricultural water for the Central Valley contractors? You know, what the cost, how much, taking care of these costs would increase the cost of a acre foot of water for the south of the Delta PVP contractors.
Right. Excuse me, this is Mark Cowen. I know that some of the water agencies have done that determination for themselves, and I would refer to their own calculations. I would just say this and answer your question, Bettina. At this point, we have not come up with a cost allocation plan. So we're looking at this at aggregate at this point in our analysis. As we move through the next few months, we're going to have to break it down further and come up with a more detailed funding plan and finance plan. And at that point in time, we'll be looking at the comparative benefits and willingness to pay of the various participants in the program, and coming up with just the type of information you're asking about.
So which means that you can't say, you haven't figured out yet exactly what the cost would be for the ag contractors versus the urban contractors, or what the cost would be for specific contractors?
We have not yet negotiated, if you will, a cost allocation breakdown for the total cost of the plan among all of the contractors, urban, ag, or individual contractors.
Thank you.
And I'm showing no further questions in the queue. I'd like to turn it back over to management for closing remarks.
I didn't know I was management, but I really am. Yeah, I was just going to say we'll be available for individual questions afterwards, and thank you for coming.